Hi Rachel, how's it going? Today I'm interested in sharing some of my favourite ideas about shifting or change of position. Not sure where I'm going to go with that, but hopefully it'll turn out to be interesting enough. The first thing that I think of is about the length of the fingerboard and the way I choose to organise my arm to go from the high positions to the low positions. Something I've given a little thought to, and I've rejected high elbow going all the way back, and I've rejected the low elbow coming forward in front of the hand in the low positions, and so my way of traversing the fingerboard is about like so. So I tend to see the shift of the left hand, the change of position, in the light of that way of traversing the fingerboard, and to treat most of my shifting as faithful excerpts from that larger movement. So if I do this movement in such a way, then my performance of the shift would be mean to be exactly the same. And shorter shifts would faithfully move in exactly the same manner. So this first position to fourth position shift would be done just as the same part of the fingerboard is covered in the larger movement. This is a guiding principle that I find useful, and the other way I shift is to leave the thumb in the crook of the neck in fourth position style, and very often in that register, middle register, where I can still reach with this kind of extension away from the thumb. I'll often use that kind of movement because I find it's really, really helpful for pitch accuracy. Seems to me a little bit of a concession or a compromise, because for the majority of my shifting, I'm inclined to enjoy the feeling of slightly dragging the finger end behind the rest of the system, whether it's in the pitch downward direction or the pitch upward direction, so that I'm definitely a dragger rather than a pusher. And probably the amount of drag depends, certainly the amount of visible drag depends on the amount of resistance at the fingertip. In that sense, it would be rather like the stroke extension, stroke continuation movements of the fingers and wrist in bowing, which would be largest when there would be a lot of resistance to the change of direction and resistance at the string because of bow pressure. When there is very little resistance from the string, say the fingertip is travelling very lightly, which is often the case, there would seem to be not much reason for a large amount of dragging response, and so the fingers might be nearly neutral regarding that, like here. The same kind of thing with large tone and say heaps of well pulled stop for vigorous vibrato, then I think there would be a more pronounced dragging of the fingers visible. And this gives me a superior control of pitch and more pleasant feeling, I think, than if I kept my digit in a constant line, say with the forearm, and shifted in that way. Surely it's going to feel and perhaps sound stiffer. I feel like less of a cellist if I keep the finger from being dragged, brush bristle like along the fingerboard. In the more exceptional manner of shifting away from the thumb, then clearly I break the earlier principle and actually push the finger away from my thumb. So this amounts to a second technique for shifting, surely. And a certain inconsistency, but for pragmatic reason I've already mentioned. I have excellent pitch accuracy in that register, shifted into and out of that register by the use of this, so it seems to me important to concede this inconsistency. And we have so many great shifting moments. This kind of thing. And so if I continue to find that I have a percentage difference for accuracy shifted this way or that way, which, well, perfect example, I missed it, with my thumb not behind, then I might be foolish not to give in to this so-called concession. What else? I've tried all kinds of things with the movement of the elbow, especially the upward and over travel of the elbow, something that I think that I encountered at Indiana University in the 70s with Starko. And then I've tried also to include a backswing for the movement, and eventually decided it's just fussy, and that if you're going to need a backswing for every movement, then you're probably going to need a backswing for the backswing, and so on, Spiegel im Spiegel like. So I think that on the whole now, even if a shift is going to be a quick one, like maybe Saint-Saëns concerto like, then I'm not going to have an anticipatory action of the elbow, but just move from where I am towards where I'm going. Important qualification for this earlier point about shifting away from the thumb, say from 4th, 5th position into 6th, 7th position, that although I may have a transition here that puts me somewhat out of postural alignment and perfect balance, it's only transitory, and I will often then bring the thumb out to have a posture in thumb position that I really would like that. So there's the transition, and then the thumb comes out. So by the time I'm singing the arrival note, I'm in the impeccable posture that I'd like to have for it. So, comes to the use of the fingers. This is fairly standard fare, but I may have an angle slightly fresh here and there on shifting techniques. So may I speak of departure finger and arrival finger, departure note and arrival note, or maybe occasionally accidentally old finger and new finger. Suppose we then have a look at a case of old finger and new finger shifting on the one string, and I'll see if I can rather thoroughly explore what might be practiced and what forms of, shall we say, exercise I would like to do to keep my shifting in good shape, and maybe still to improve my percentages for arrival accuracy. Percentage of arrival accurate remains of intense importance in the real world of concertizing, and no serious concert cellist wants to be heard missing shifts. So yeah, what works for accuracy is very, very important. At the same time, accuracy is only one very important thing about shifting, and the, shall we say, the contextual rightness of a shift, its expressive purpose being satisfied, these kinds of things are tremendously important. I can't really escape the category of, or that part of technique that has to do with using different positions in order simply to facilitate the getting of certain groups of notes easier. Typical thing like these notes are easier to get in third position than by using first and fourth position. That said, I wouldn't want to throw away this fingering possibility because it makes for an expressively quite different result and might be just perfect in some situations. It reminds me of one of my favourite thoughts about all of this, that the fingering which is the use of positions and consequent fingering that is most efficient, meaning involving the least movement, is not of course always the one that one would want to choose. Yeah, reminds of that other intense thing about is one performing that portamento, that sound of shifting, as an unwanted accident of changing position, or is one going for the portamento because it's expressively just right. I mustn't fail to get a little bit towards the end of this video about the importance of bow pressure, the right side, in how shifting sounds. I'm going to try to practice a shift from the ground up. So, nice easy one for accuracy would be first position to fourth position. Expressively, this could be so many different things. In fact, I'm going to practice it with a bow change because it makes it more complicated for the exercise regimen that would lead up to it. There would be this, and there would be, and there would be, where the shift was virtually inaudible. There could be the very super loud shift. Even the shift could be louder than the note either side. This would usually not be occurring because we tend to think rightly that the portamento usually would be somewhat softer than the notes either side. So, starting from the ground up, I have the old finger and the new finger, and first issue comes to mind is that I should be able to play with the old finger perfectly comfortably with an impeccable posture, and the new finger perfectly comfortable with an impeccable posture. So the first thing to practice would be the playing of either of these notes, as it were, in isolation. I would then again define how I'd like to be at home and how I would like to be away or in the new home. And that could take a little bit of time. Then, not having yet performed a shift, I would go from one to the other, say in both directions, without particular attention how I go from one to the other, but simply to have one and as naturally as possible go to the other one. Not at all fussily. And this might remind me again of, say, picking up the phone. It would have that innocent, unconscious, natural way of moving from one place to another. Next step might be to start to focus on the joining of these two things with a slurred bowing, which is similar, and the use of the bow in the shifting is helpful in a way because it makes the sound of the fingers obvious. So here I am meaning to do the same thing as I have just done without a lot of attention to the connection manner. Then I could bring my attention to the feeling and the style of the movement itself and ask for that same natural, simple thing. The next thing to bring in would be alternatives for use of the digits and of the bow before doing that, I can remind myself that it seems to be the case almost without exception that the time of arrival of the new note is on time. So if the note happens to be, say, on a beat like 4, then the movement of the hand will precede beat 4, and beat 4 will happen not before that happens. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So no matter how quickly I would move, reminds me, even the fastest shifting speeds I need are surprisingly languid. This is a little counterintuitive because sometimes it sounds like, I go back to the Renaissance again, it sounds like the movement might have been very fast, but here it's really just a trick of the bow with a crescendo and an emphasis upon arrival, giving this do-wah. Sounds a little bit like one went do, but in actual fact, no. Okay, so let's suppose that then I feel that I know how I want to be here, I feel I know how I want to be here, and I can naturally and comfortably move between the two places. Then I have to select, since I don't have to select the timing of the event, except that I have to select how late towards the 4th beat in that case I would move. And I could practice leaving already on, say, 3.5. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or I can leave on 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so forth. So I would be practicing and have good control of the speed with which I'm moving. Then I would turn my attention maybe to the choices I have regarding the old and the new finger. So I can shift all the way on the old finger to the new position roughly, which would give me, in an extreme case, an extra note. This is surely worth practicing. Or in a less extreme case where the bow concealed it somewhat, like that. Or I could shift all the way on the new finger by putting it down right away, which in the extreme case would give the extra note here of D. This is worth practicing, and I could conceal that at least 2 ways. I could drop the finger softer, and I could have the bow softer at the time that it drops. Logically, we could have the best of both worlds and shift a little bit on the old finger, drop the new finger. Seems a little bit clunky at this practice tempo, but nevertheless a good exercise in itself. Practicing with the slurs simplifies things. Now let's add in the bow change, and so the possibility of shifting during the old bow or during the new bow. Here is shifting in the old bow. So the bow change comes at the arrival at the new note, and shifting in the new bow. That was a loud one. Or a softer one. That's it. Where most of the shift was done in the down bow rather than the old bow in this case. The up bow. Again, one could split the difference and perform the bow change around about the middle of the shift in slow motion. I think that if I can successfully do each of these things at will, then surely I have pretty good control of these variables. Leaves in particular the already mentioned control of the bow pressure, not I think so much bow speed, but the bow pressure during the shift, so that the shift is loud or soft, mainly I would say according to the bow pressure that is used. It reminds me that there is ultimately a war between clean playing that leaves out the sound of shifting a lot of the time, or most of the time. There's a war between that cleanliness and playing that is, say, well, nicely sustained of tone. To, if we are using a change of position and the situation is legato, we have at one extreme that the sustain is full. This is not necessarily distasteful to everybody. And at the other extreme, we have that the sustain is broken so that the shift will not be audible. So these, I think these two ends of the continuum pretty undeniable. We get to choose artistically between them. Ultimately, we can leave out shifting by crossing strings, but then the sacrifice can be, according to context, that you don't have the same colour for the two notes. Of course, not having the same colour for the two notes sometimes is a plus. So a nicely complicated soup of related and sometimes competing issues with change of position or shifting. In the end, I think that the study of shifting styles, of portamento styles, of having a nice collection of personal favourites, say, to fit different expressive situations is a real plus, and I certainly try not to see changing position as any kind of necessary evil. Thanks again, Rachel.